Hi, my name is Erica Amakuchi and welcome to vlog number 11 for IAH 207. And today I want to start off by talking about episode 7 of the podcast, which is called A Church with AIDS. So I want to start off by talking about a key idea that was mentioned in the podcast that I kind of pulled out. And that idea that I want to talk about is that in times of tragedy or in times of distress, it's much more important to talk about or celebrate people's differences than to look down upon them and make it even harder for people. And I think that the Church of MCC San Francisco really did a good job celebrating people's differences and welcoming everyone at a time where it was really needed. So I think when talking about like an LGBT general perspective and you think of church, most LGBT people go, oh, like the church, oh, they don't accept us, oh, like we push away from the church or we don't feel accepted by the church. And so I think that this podcast is really important to include in the readings because it shows a different perspective. It shows the part of the church that isn't like judgmental. It's open and it's there for everyone. And I think that's really important and a good contrast to what the normal view of the church is by LGBT people. So when looking into MCC San Francisco, I think there's a lot of really special things about it, but I think that I have a quote that kind of sums up the experience in a nutshell. And that quote was given by Lynn Gerber, who talks throughout most of the podcast, and she says, MCC San Francisco was a place where people could be both gay and Christian and didn't have to repent for either one. In other words, it is open to all types of people and it doesn't make people feel bad for being who they are. Instead of making people feel bad for being different, the church really accepts everyone and is very open, and they don't make anyone feel like they're not supposed to be there or don't belong. And that's just part of the way that they kind of celebrate the differences. And through that, they've been able to provide support to so many people through funeral services, through general counseling, through spiritual counseling, just to like being there for families and people. They've really done a lot, especially since these kind of people who are going to this church are people who have been ostracized from potentially by their family or by loved ones and friends, and definitely from other churches. And so it's really important that this church has reached out to all types of people to accept them into their community and offered them their services. And so in the podcast, they mention how although it was kind of predominantly white men, there was a large variety of socioeconomic classes, which is a way that they kind of helped include everyone and didn't ostracize people for not having enough money or not having the nicest clothes to wear to church. So even if you weren't LGBT and you were like if you didn't have enough money, you could go to this church and you wouldn't feel out of place because there were other people around you who were homeless or low income. So that was something also really special about the church and their welcoming and diversity in a time that was so like constricting and so like polarizing to such large groups of people. And so kind of the last way I want to point out how MCC San Francisco has utilized people's diversity to an advantage and just kind of helped accept people and make people feel like they belong is something kind of big and that was kind of controversial at the time and could still be now for sure. And that is giving gay people communion, because at the time, like people who were gay were not allowed to take communion and they weren't really seen as like full Christians. And so this church allowed everyone to partake in communion, which was really important. So lastly, before I talk about the book, Close to the Knives, I want to talk a little bit about something that surprised me. And what surprised me is Ronald Reagan's press secretary's reaction to questioning about AIDS, because I understand like that the government wasn't very helpful in this epidemic, but just kind of listening to the people talk about it really helps put it in even further perspective for me, because apparently when his press secretary was asked in 1982, which was 2 years already into the epidemic, oh, is Reagan doing anything about it, or like have you ever heard him mention it? The press secretary just said that Reagan's basically never mentioned it, or they've never talked about it, and just said that they're not even really acknowledging it. And I thought that that was really impactful and definitely very hurtful to hear, coming from someone who was supposed to be representing our own government. So I'm going to talk about Close to the Knives in my next vlog more in depth, but I kind of want to give a general observation before I go about something that I've noticed while I'm reading. And that's that toward the beginning of the book, as he describes his sexual encounters, he's very like energized and excited and everything's new and exciting and it's all good. But then as you go on, the way he describes them, it becomes more like some of them are kind of forced, some of them aren't as great, some of them are in sketchy areas, and he kind of like wakes up from his younger self and kind of realizes the true state of the world is kind of how I see it. He's not naive and young anymore, and he's kind of realizing what the world is or the kind of place it is. And so that's kind of an observation I had while I was reading Close to the Knives. Stay tuned for my final vlog on Thursday. Thank you.